Hello, everyone. Welcome to the FarmRaise podcast. FarmRaise helps farmers get funding, and these podcasts will explain different aspects of farm funding and financing. We'll talk to lenders and grant programs to get you the in-depth information you need. Morning, Gary. How are you?
JC, I'm very well today. It's a great day here in New Hampshire.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, and I really appreciate your taking the time to speak to me for the FarmRaise podcast. Just so our listeners know, Gary Matteson is the Senior Vice President and Beginning Farmer Programs and Outreach at the Farm Credit Council. So he's a great person to talk to about farm credit, and we're really happy that you're with us today. Thanks, Gary.
Sure thing.
Would you mind telling our listeners a little about yourself?
Sure. Be happy to. I think that it's important for people on a podcast to know who they're listening to. And I guess I would identify primarily as a farmer. For 30 years, I farmed here in New Hampshire as a greenhouse cut flower grower and had a small herd of beef cattle that I marketed locally as grass-fed beef. And I guess that's as far as formative experiences, being a farmer and having to meet a payroll with employees and running a couple of businesses is probably good practice for helping to understand how other people view credit and obtain credit and how lending is done, because part of my other experience over that career of farming was being elected to my local Farm Credit Association board of directors. So I was on the board of, at that time, a farm credit lending cooperative that was about $4 billion in size. And it's kind of humbling to sit as a member of a 12-member board of directors making decisions about $4 billion worth of other people's money. So I was got director training for that job. Spent 15 years as an elected board member and was term limited off, and then began, or during that 15 years, I should say, I was on the National Farm Credit Board for 7 years, which is the Farm Credit Council. So I now am an employee of the Farm Credit Council, working as a full-time employee. And now from my home in New Hampshire, my job is about helping farm credit associations across the country improve their programs for young beginning small farmers, and also spend a lot of time dealing with local food system issues. And I guess to that point, I also, as far as biography, I am currently National Farmers Market Coalition Board of Directors, and also serve on the Farmer Veteran Coalition National Board of Directors. In my off hours, I am taking the farmland I have here in New Hampshire. I've been taking some of it and converting it from forest back into the pasture land that it was about 100 years ago, well, up until probably 1930, so 90 years ago. And intend to raise cattle once again here as grass-fed beef using active rodent, turning some grass and other forages into pounds of beef to sell on the local food market here. So that's me, JC.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, that is a lot. You're a busy person. What a great, set of experiences for you to, understand the credit system from so many different angles. I can imagine that's really useful in your current job. Can you situate us a little bit? We're going to move on to talk about farm credit, but could you give us an overview of farm funding in the U.S. today? What do you think is working, and what do you think needs some improvement?
Well, sure. The overall way to look at farm funding in the U.S. today is to understand that there are different types of farm businesses that would be seeking credit for different purposes. And so my idea of a farmer or your idea of a farmer is most often, well, that's the guy I know down the street, or me in my own business. So we all carry these archetypes of what's a farmer and what's that farm business like, and it's easy to divide it into us and them. Well, I was a small farmer, right? So I have a small farm business and I understand that. And then there are those big farmers out in the Midwest that do all sorts of things that I don't understand, but that's what they do. And in the end, I'd like to think that those farm businesses, whether they're large or small, still carry a whole bunch of similarities in what they're looking for. And that falls into generally two categories: long-term land purchases, mortgages, and then shorter-term operating loans, which I would include as, the kind of loan, an annual operating loan would be typical for buying seeds or fertilizer or whatever inputs, and then being paid off in a year, and a loan that would also include a loan that would probably be something like a 5 or 7 year loan to buy a piece of equipment like a tractor or processing equipment of some kind. So the needs of agriculture, no matter what the business, are roughly the same. It's important to consider that the statistics I'll be talking about will be about farm businesses. So farm business, as defined by the USDA, National Ag Statistics Service, who collects this kind of information through various surveys, is a farming operation that has an intent to make money. Commercial in some sense. They're going to produce something and then they're going to try to sell it. So if you're there's a bit of a line of distinction there, that if you have a big garden in your backyard and you give it away, you're not going to be included in what I'm about to say, because it's not a commercial lending environment. So this is about lending to farm businesses, and roughly farm credit would have about a 40% market share of lending to farm businesses, what USDA would call commercial credit. Independent banks, community banks, or even larger banks altogether would comprise another 40% of lending available to farmers for farm businesses. USDA typically is somewhere around 7 to 10% of lending to farm businesses, and then the balance would be made up by other sources of credit, which could be, the insurance companies, the rich guy down the road, individual investors. So that's how credit suppliers shake out. Not everybody has access to each of those credit suppliers, right? On any given day, if you wanted to put those sources of credit across how easy are they to get, for the least creditworthy person, that's what USDA's Farm Services Agency is there to do, is to supply credit to those who cannot get it elsewhere. And in fact, to get credit from Farm Services Agency, or FSA, you need to be turned down by a commercial lender saying, nope, I'm sorry, we can't do business with you. You do not meet our standards for providing credit. So that would be the first stepping stone, if you will, from commercial farm lenders would be FSA. Farm credit and commercial banks typically would have very similar standards for lending money, such as how much equity that farmer would have to put up. And equity you can think of as down payment. And then finally getting to the more difficult end of the spectrum, insurance companies or private investors typically are looking at larger farm businesses where they can put millions of dollars into a single loan. So, large loans, low overhead cost of delivery. So that's kind of how that plays out. Another thing to understand about the issuance of credit is that it's not always sitting down in front of a loan officer to say, well, here's my business plan. As a matter of fact, about 50% of the loans that Farm Credit issues in a given year are through the use of a credit scorecard, which is, you can think of that as a credit card application that, answer 5 or 6 questions. Do you own your home? Do you rent? What's your income? And then check this box so we can see your credit score. That kind of application that's very short and very quick is responsible for about 50% of the loans that Farm Credit makes in a year. That's a very different concept than most people have for farm funding in the U.S. today. Some of it is just like, almost an online application, and we'll let you know in about 20 seconds if we can lend you $250,000, and in some places that kind of application will get you up to $1 million. So it's important to recognize that there are different ways of credit delivery along with different providers.
And would that scorecard application be more suited to established farmers and larger farmers?
Yeah, and it's actually most suited, JC, to somebody with a good credit score, right? Think of somebody who goes to their tractor dealer and wants to buy a tractor, and that could be a rural homeowner who's got 50 acres of land and they want to start baling hay. So they go to their local dealer. That's the kind of place where you would see a credit scorecard sort of approach to credit, which may be from the dealer, it may be from John Deere Credit, it may be from Farm Credit.
And I just had one other question about the USDA. And you mentioned that USDA through FSA accounts for about 7 to 10% of commercial credit today. And so that is direct loans to farmers. Can you talk a little bit about the USDA and the FSA's role in guaranteeing loans?
Sure. It's again, this for scope and scale purposes, commercial lenders have typically about 8% of their loan portfolios to farmers guaranteed by USDA, and Farm Credit is very close to that, probably at about 7%. So a certain percentage of the other commercial lenders use loan guarantees. It's particularly important for beginning farmers. And just I got to get this thought out there. If we're talking about lending, if you're a beginning farmer, don't go borrow money until you find out if you are eligible for FSA's Beginning Farmer Down Payment Loan Program. It's also known as the 54550 loan program, which is where the beginning farmer borrower puts up 5% equity. FSA follows with 45% of the total loan in a very low interest rate 40-year loan that's at a fixed rate, and then a commercial lender comes in with 50% of the total loan with a loan guarantee put on it. So that's like the ultimate in how the FSA collaborates with the other commercial lenders that are out there, is the Beginning Farmer Down Payment Loan Program. And why I say for a beginning farmer, don't go borrow money unless you find out if you're eligible for that program, is you can't beat that. That's like the cheapest credit available. But if you own farmland already, you may not be eligible. So that's the sticking point. So do that first. So the idea that FSA uses those loan guarantees, a loan guarantee does not increase the credit quality of a loan that's made. It decreases the need for that lender, like Farm Credit or a commercial lender, to capitalize the loan, to have money in reserve in case that loan goes bad, in case it can't be repaid. So it doesn't make you a better borrower in the sense of, wow, this is, I'm really likely to repay my loan now. It doesn't do that. It just limits the loss of that commercial lender. And in essence, what it really, those loan guarantees, how they act for a lender is to by reducing the potential for loss, it means that the lender can make a loan where they otherwise would not, right? Whether it's a beginning farmer or not, more experienced farmer, the loan guarantee is something that the commercial lender typically asks USDA for as a way to make loans to farmers that they would not otherwise make because they don't meet their lending standards. So it's a very important role for USDA, and USDA does much more in loan guarantees than they do in direct lending.
Great. Okay, that's very clear. Thank you. If we could drill down a little bit on farm credit, is it right? I mean, when a farmer borrows from farm credit, he will join an association. And is that the right word to use?
Yes.
What does that mean, and what are the benefits of that?
Well, joining that association means you are a member of the cooperative called that local farm credit association. My local farm credit here in New Hampshire is Farm Credit East. You might know, a listener out there to your podcast might know of Farm Credit Services of America or Mid-America, or there are various names for the 67 different farm credit associations that are out there that each have a territory, and generally they don't overlap. So that's how you would know of your local farm credit. And if you're listening to this and in front of your computer, you can go to farmcredit.com and look. There's a find your lender tab right at the top where you can put in your zip code and find out who your local farm credit association is. But as a borrower, I'm still a borrower. I belong to my local association that allows me to vote for the board of directors that would be mostly made up of farmers, with typically two outside directors that are experts in some part of the businesses that happen in that local association's area. And that also means that at the end of the year, that board of directors made up of farmers votes to say, you know what, we didn't have a whole lot of losses this year. We are going to declare a dividend to our patrons, to those who borrow money from us, our members, called a patronage dividend. And that typically is in cash. So it's effectively, it lowers your interest rate. At the beginning of the year, you sign up for a higher interest rate because you're a member of a cooperative. If there are no losses at the end of the year, some of that money is given back to you. And in my case, last year, just as a specific example, I got back the equivalent of 1.25% of the stated interest rate that I paid over the course of the year. So it's kind of nice to get a refund from your lender. Thanks. It's kind of a thanks for doing business with us. We didn't have losses. Here's some of your money back. And the reason for that mechanism of patronage dividend is because Farm Credit as an institution nationwide, if you aggregate us all together, we sell bonds on Wall Street. That's where our money comes from, is we're selling bonds to investors. And those investors want to see the capability of all of the farm credit institutions across the country to earn money. So we earn money, and then take some of that net profit of earnings at the end of the year and give it back to the farmers. So we're essentially telling those investors, yep, we know how to earn money, but our stated purpose as a cooperative is to benefit the members. So we'll show you we earn the money, and then we'll give some of it back to the farmers who paid it in.
That's a great advantage. That's very helpful. Thanks for explaining that. I'd love you to talk a little bit about a beginning farmer, the programs that, Farm Credit offers them. And also, as a farmer is beginning to think about this process, what should that farmer have in mind or organized as they begin these conversations with a lender?
Well, that's a question. The simplest question, JC, sometimes gives you an oversimpple answer. But I'm going to give you an answer to that I'm not sure every beginning farmer borrower thinks of, and that is you have to know what you're asking for when you go to a lender. My oldest son was a loan officer for Farm Credit for several years, and he would talk of farmers coming up to him and saying, or asking the question, well, how much money can I borrow? And his sort of flippant answer was none. I can't tell you how much you can borrow. You have to ask me how much I will lend you. In other words, you have to go to a lender with a plan, or with at least with an idea of how much you need to borrow to accomplish a particular set of things: buying land, buying equipment, renting land, buying seeds, whatever it is. That lender needs to get a request from a borrower first, in order to start that process, because a lender can't just say, yeah, you look like a great guy, I'll lend you $1 million. What are you going to use it for? I mean, that's not how it works. So the most important thing that a borrower has in that conversation with a lender is a good description of what they want to do with it. Now, if it's the smaller the request, the less documentation there would need to be. Not everybody needs a 150-page business plan, with pictures and arrows and charts and all that. But I can tell you that the most important and most impressive thing that a borrower can bring to a lender is a cash flow budget for the entire year, their production year. And that's because that cash flow budget, which, I'm only talking like a one-page spreadsheet, shows the sales and the variable costs, a gross margin, and then the overhead costs and a net profit. And in the end, being able to show a net profit is what the lender is looking for. It doesn't mean you have to make money in that first year, but you should have enough budgets to show that eventually you're going to be having profit from which you're going to repay that loan. For all of the other things that you can toss into a business plan, what the lender really wants to know, and the borrower must understand also, is how are you going to pay the loan back? Because it isn't just, hey, I've got an idea. I woke up today and I wanted to be a farmer. Can you lend me money for a farm? That's not how it works. It's show a plan. The bigger the loan, the better the plan has to be. And then besides that plan, the other essential features for a lender would be showing what are you worth? And that would be a balance sheet, a statement, a financial statement that says what you own and what you owe. And the difference between the two of those is your net worth. And then probably an income, a profit and loss statement, which would be a sort of a snapshot of what your business is expected to do over the course of a year. What's the income? What are the expenses, profit and loss? So that's what any given lender might have a particular format that they want you to use. So you can go online and see what FSA would request for a format, how you fill out those forms. And it's probably a good idea to have that kind of stuff done at least in a beginning way before you even approach a lender, so that you can begin to speak their language and be able to communicate the stuff that they need to know. Because getting a loan it should always feel like a negotiation. I, as a farmer, am looking to you, Mr. Lender, to rent me some money. I'm going to rent it for a particular period of time under these particular conditions, and I'm going to pay you back so much a month, or at harvest, or whatever it is. But if it isn't a negotiation, then you should probably stop and think about doing something else. You should never be in a position where you have to borrow money, where you are in a position where you cannot talk to that lender and come to an agreement about what's the best thing for both of them.
That's a great piece of advice. I think that sometimes people go into this process in an apprehensive way, but I think that's great to keep in mind that this is negotiation, that and that you have a sort of voice at the table, and can speak up for yourself as you develop this relationship, with a lender.
Absolutely. And that conversation is, it's like going to the doctor, right? They ask you all sorts of probing questions that nobody else asks you, and it's uncomfortable. You have to admit your faults and where your pains are, and do you really brush your teeth or floss twice a day? All those kinds of things are well, you do that for financial stuff. It's even worse. But you should expect as a borrower, and you should anticipate those kinds of questions and understand that the lender's asking those questions so as to understand and help you as the borrower understand what's your position. What are you, what are you asking for? Where are you in this scheme of borrowing money for a farm business that is risky? And do you really understand what's going on? So the tough questions that you get asked are meant to help the borrower understand, how they're going to solve some of these problems. What happens if you have a flood? What happens if your greenhouse business and the power goes out? Do you have a generator? All those what if sort of questions are part of this, but also that rolls into the financials also. What if you don't get the yield that you think you're going to get? How do you, what's plan B? So being ready with plan B is always a good strategy. In other words, how are you going to solve the problems that you can anticipate, like a drought or low yield, and how can you, being able to recognize how you plan for anticipated problems, how good are you at solving unanticipated problems? Because that's kind of what the lender wants to know is, have you thought about this, and have you thought about what could go wrong and how to solve those problems?
And and I think that the lender is, first of all, the lender wants to lend money, and secondly, the lender wants to lend money to farmers, who can pay it back, because they don't want the farmer to be in a tough position down the line. So this is really a partnership. You're going into business, with your lender in some ways.
Absolutely. And it's probably worth talking about, so what happens if things go wrong? If you can't make your payments, if you have just a terrible crop year, and as a farmer, every farmer has one of those at some point. I certainly have. The important thing to remember is what your lender wants most is to keep talking to you. Mm-hmm. That if you avoid your lender, avoid talking to the lender, then they don't know what's going on, and that's a bad thing. They need to know. A lender would much rather hear that you are having a problem and you're working on solving it, and including the lender in that fact, than finding out 6 months down the road, well, I was working on a problem and nothing went right, and now I'm even in worse condition. I can remember in my career as a greenhouse grower, a short story here of my greenhouse low temperature alarm. I turned it off when I went down to the greenhouse to fix the oil burner and forgot to turn it back on. The oil burner went out again. So that next morning when I got to the greenhouse, and this is the week before Valentine's Day in the flower business, I had frozen one of my 3 greenhouses. That I went out to grab a flower, and it was like grabbing a handful of potato chips. It was frozen solid. And, that feeling in the pit of your stomach, well, yeah, this is a big failure. And after I did the best I could to mitigate damage, later that day I called my loan officer and said, I got a real problem. I'm not sure how it's going to affect me. I know it's going to make my income over Valentine's week pretty bad, and that's my biggest week of the year, but I'll let you know what happens. And I guess I'm telling people that so as to encourage them to do the same. When things go wrong, let your lender know so that they can be part of the solution, rather than keeping them in the dark and hoping they don't find out. because my lender sure as heck had to stand behind me that year, because I ended up having about 1/3 lower income that year than I was planning on.
Yeah, have those difficult conversations. Don't try and hide things and hope that magically something will get better. But they are difficult conversations to have.
Yeah, hope is essential for farming, JC. Hope is essential, but it's really not a good plan.
yeah, sure. What is there anything else that you think would be useful for the listeners to be thinking about as they either about farm credit or as they think about embarking on the loan process?
Well, there's always the idea of what you are going to put into the bargain as a borrower, how much equity you have, and that's a hard thing for a beginning farmer to save money, but there is probably nothing more impressive to a lender than for a borrower to come to the table and say, you know what, I'm looking to borrow money for the next 20 years from you for a mortgage on farmland, and here's how much I have saved to accomplish that. That's very powerful, and it's actually required to some degree. That's the equity investment that I mentioned earlier, the down payment, if you will, that is essential, because remember that this is a commercial lending environment. Lending to a business is much riskier. It's not like borrowing money for a house. Everybody hears those home mortgage advertisements on the radio or billboards or wherever of low rates, and that's lending. Lending for the homeowner sort of market is very different than lending to a commercial business, which is riskier. So consequently, the rates are typically higher than what you would find for a home mortgage. So I'd say keep that in mind and start out by saving money.
Good advice. Well, Gary, I really appreciate all of this really great download of knowledge this morning. Thank you very much. I've learned lots from this conversation. I think our listeners will too, and I really appreciate the fact that you devoted so much time to this. Thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome, JC, and I encourage your podcast listeners to reach out to me directly if they would like to do so, and also begin conversations with their friends and other lenders ahead of when they need the money so that they have relationships already established. That's always a good way to start, is talking to somebody you already know about what you need rather than waiting until you're desperate to borrow some money.
Good advice. Well, good to talk to you. You're a fountain of knowledge. You've been at this a long time, and I know that we all really appreciate it here at FarmRaise. So thank you.
Sure thing, JC. Happy to be with you.
Well, thanks so much for listening to that interview. I hope you found it useful. Be sure to subscribe so that you're notified when a new podcast comes out. Remember to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to keep up to speed on all aspects of farm funding. And visit us at farmraise.com to learn more about what we can do for you.